Picture this: a quiet evening, the kind where the world seems to hush itself just for you, and I'm standing at the edge of my kitchen, staring at a half-empty bottle of Merlot on the counter. The crimson liquid catches the dim light, almost winking at me, as if it knows the secrets I've been keeping from myself. My name is Rachel, and at 45, I've built a life that looks like a polished photograph from the outside. Sharp edges, perfect lighting, no flaws to be seen. But up close, oh, up close, you'd see the cracks, the smudges, the places where the frame doesn't quite hold together. I live in a quaint suburban home just outside of Portland, Oregon, with my husband, David. He's 48, a man of steady habits and quiet strength, the kind who can fix a leaky faucet without a second thought, but struggles to mend the silences that have grown between us over the years. David and I have been married for 18 years, a number that feels both like a lifetime and a fleeting moment. We met in our late 20s at a local art gallery opening. Me, a freelance graphic designer with paint under my fingernails, and him, an accountant with a surprising appreciation for abstract expressionism. Back then, our differences were the spark, the friction that lit up our nights. I can still remember the way his hand felt on the small of my back as we danced at our wedding, the world blurring into a kaleidoscope of laughter and promises. But time has a way of dulling even the brightest flames, doesn't it? Now, our evenings are often spent in separate corners of the house. Him with his spreadsheets in the study, me with my sketches in the living room, the space between us filled with unspoken words. It's not that we don't love each other. I think we do, in the way you love a familiar song, even when you've forgotten some of the lyrics. But there are moments, late at night when the house is still, that I catch myself wondering if this is all there is. I'll lie in bed next to David, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, and feel this ache, this quiet hunger for something more. Not just in the way our bodies used to intertwine, though heavens, I miss the heat of those stolen moments, the way we'd lose ourselves in a dance of skin and whispers, a language only we understood. No, it's deeper than that. It's a longing for connection, for the kind of raw, unfiltered truth we used to share without fear. I see it in David too, though he'd never admit it. There's a shadow in his hazel eyes sometimes, a flicker of something restless when he thinks I'm not looking. Last week I caught him staring out the window at nothing in particular, his coffee growing cold in his hands. I wanted to ask him what he was thinking, to reach across the table and pull him back to me, but the words just wouldn't come. Instead, I turned away, busying myself with the dishes, letting the clatter of plates drown out the silence. That moment lingered with me, though, a quiet reminder of how far we'd drifted. A few nights later, I decided to try again, to bridge the gap that had widened between us. I spent hours in the kitchen, preparing David's favorite meal, roasted lamb with rosemary and garlic, the kind of dish that used to make him drop everything just to savor it. I dressed up, too, slipping into a deep blue dress that hugged my curves, the one he once said made my eyes look like the ocean on a stormy day. I even suggested a movie night, picking out an old romantic flick we used to watch curled up together. I had this flicker of hope, this tiny spark that maybe, just maybe, we could reignite something. But when David came home, he barely glanced at me. His eyes were glued to his laptop, his fingers tapping away as he muttered something about a deadline. "Looks nice, Rach," he said, not even looking at the table I'd set with such care. "But I've got to get this done." That was it. No smile, no lingering gaze, just the cold hum of his computer filling the room. The sting of it hit me like a slap, sharp and sudden. I sat there for a moment, the lamb growing cold, my dress feeling like a costume I had no business wearing. Eventually, I gave up, clearing the table in silence, and went to bed alone. Lying there, staring at the ceiling, I felt like a ghost in my own home, unseen, unheard, just drifting through the spaces where I used to belong. The ache in my chest grew heavier, a weight I couldn't shake, and I wondered how long I'd been fading away without even noticing. The next morning, I needed to get out, to breathe air that wasn't thick with disappointment. I grabbed my sketchbook and headed to a little coffee shop downtown, a cozy spot with mismatched chairs and the scent of freshly ground beans. I settled into a corner, letting my pencil dance across the page, losing myself in the lines and shadows of a half-imagined landscape. That's when Nathan appeared. He slid into the chair across from me, a playful grin on his face, and said, "That's some serious talent you've got there. Mind if I watch?" His voice had this easy warmth, like honey over toast, and before I knew it, I was laughing, really laughing, for the first time in weeks. His attention felt like sunlight breaking through after a long gray winter, warming parts of me I'd forgotten could still feel. I told myself it was nothing, just a friendly chat over coffee, but there was a spark in his hazel eyes that made my heart skip in a way it hadn't in ages. I brushed it off, though, keeping my smile polite, my words light. Even as I felt the pull of his gaze, I can still feel the heat of that first moment with Nathan, the way it crept up on me like a slow-burning fire I didn't see coming. After that day at the coffee shop, his texts started popping up on my phone. Little things at first, funny memes that made me chuckle despite myself, invitations for quick coffee breaks that felt harmless enough. But his persistence was like a steady drip, wearing down the walls I'd built around my heart. I told myself I'd keep it casual, just a friend to talk to. But one evening, after weeks of back and forth, I gave in. He asked me to meet him after hours, just to chat, he said, and I found myself saying yes. We ended up in a dimly lit parking lot near the edge of town, the air cool against my skin, the world quiet except for the hum of distant traffic. He leaned in close, his breath warm, and before I could think twice, his lips were on mine. Urgent. Hungry. Like he'd been waiting for this as long as I had. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might break free, a wild mix of guilt and desire crashing over me like a tidal wave. I knew I should pull away, but I didn't. I couldn't. That kiss lingered on my lips long after I drove home, a secret I tucked away in the shadows of my mind. Then there was Eric. I'd met him at a late-night art class I'd started taking to fill the empty hours, a space where I could lose myself in brush strokes and color. He was bold, always watching me with this intensity that made my skin prickle. One night, after everyone else had packed up and left, I stayed behind to finish a piece, and he lingered too. The studio was silent, the air thick with the scent of paint and turpentine, and before I knew it, he had me backed against the easel. His hands moved with a daring confidence, tracing paths along my arms, my waist, igniting sparks I hadn't felt in years. My mind screamed at me to stop, to step back, but my body betrayed me, leaning into his touch, craving the rush of being wanted. His rough whispers in my ear sent shivers down my spine, words I won't repeat, but that burned themselves into my memory. I left that studio trembling, torn between the thrill of it all and the weight of what I'd just allowed to happen. Daniel came into my life on a rainy afternoon, the kind where the world outside looks like it's been washed in gray. I'd been helping out with a community garden project, and he was there too, hands deep in the soil, his quiet smile a contrast to the storm brewing overhead. When the rain started pouring harder, he invited me inside his nearby place for tea, just to warm up, he said. We sat close, steam rising from our mugs, and his gentle presence felt like a balm to the ache I'd been carrying. Then, in a moment I didn't see coming, he reached for me. His embrace soft but firm, holding me like he never wanted to let go. That tenderness turned into something deeper, a connection that unfolded in ways I hadn't felt in so long, ways that spoke to the parts of me I'd thought were long dormant. His soft murmurs of affection wrapped around me like a blanket, and I let myself sink into it, even as guilt clawed at the edges of my mind. But it was that one week, that single reckless week, when everything collided, when I let myself fall completely into the chaos I'd created. I saw each of them, Nathan, Eric, and Daniel, on separate nights, giving in to desires I'd kept locked away for years. With Nathan, it was the scent of his cologne clinging to my skin afterward, a sharp, woodsy note that I could still smell hours later as I slipped into bed beside David. With Eric, it was the intensity of his touch, the way his rough whispers echoed in my ears long after I'd left, a secret soundtrack to my sleepless nights. And with Daniel, it was the warmth of his closeness, the way he looked at me with such care, murmuring words that made for a while. The thrill of it all was like a drug, a high I chased without thinking about the crash that was bound to come. Every stolen moment with Nathan, Eric, and Daniel felt like a burst of color in a life that had faded to grayscale. But slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, that rush started to sour. It began with little things, jumping at every ping on my phone, my heart racing as I fumbled to check if it was David or one of them. I'd swipe away notifications with shaky fingers, terrified that a single misplaced message could unravel everything. What if David saw something he shouldn't? What if a name popped up at the wrong moment? My mind spun with worst-case scenarios, each one more suffocating than the last. I started sleeping less, my nights haunted by the fear of being caught, of seeing disappointment, or worse, betrayal, in David's eyes. Then there were the changes in David himself. He'd always been a man of routine, predictable in his quiet way, but lately, something felt off. He stopped asking about my day, something he used to do without fail, even if just out of habit. Instead, he'd come home, give me a curt nod, and disappear into his study without a word. Sometimes, I'd catch him staring at me across the dinner table or from the doorway, his expression unreadable, like he was trying to solve a puzzle I didn't even know I'd become. Those looks sent chills down my spine, not because they were angry, but because they were so empty, so distant. I couldn't tell if he suspected something or if he'd just given up on us entirely. Either way, it gnawed at me, a constant reminder of the fragile ground I was treading on. I remember one night vividly, the memory sharp as a blade. I'd been with Nathan, losing myself in the heat of the moment, the kind of encounter that left my pulse racing and my thoughts scattered. I came home late, my hair slightly mussed, my cheeks still flushed from the rush. I tried to slip in quietly, hoping David would already be asleep, but he was waiting in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with a glass of water in his hand. The light was low, casting shadows across his face, but I could feel the weight of his gaze as soon as I stepped through the door. "Where have you been, Rach?" he asked, his voice calm but pointed, like a knife wrapped in silk. I froze, my mind scrambling for an excuse. "Just a client meeting," I said, forcing a smile, but my voice trembled, betraying me. I saw it then, a flicker of doubt in his hazel eyes, a crack in the trust we'd built over nearly 2 decades. He didn't push, just nodded slowly, but that look stayed with me, haunting me long after I'd crawled into bed, my heart pounding with the lie I'd just told. It wasn't just David I had to worry about. There was a close call with Emily, my sister, who's always had a knack for sniffing out when something's wrong. I was with Daniel one afternoon, caught up in the warmth of his presence, the kind of closeness that made the world outside disappear. We were in the middle of, well, let's just say a moment of intense connection, when my phone buzzed on the table. I nearly dropped it in my haste to answer, seeing Emily's name flash across the screen. Her voice was casual at first, just checking in, but then she paused. "Why do you sound so out of breath, Rach?" she asked. A hint of curiosity, or was it suspicion, creeping into her tone. I laughed, too quickly, too nervously, and blurted out that I'd just been jogging. Jogging, of all things, when I hadn't run a day in my life. There was a long silence on her end, and I could almost picture her narrowing her eyes, piecing things together. "Okay," she finally said, but the word carried a weight that made my stomach twist. I hung up, my hands shaking, knowing I hadn't convinced her, not even close. In the quiet moments, when I was alone with, I can feel the weight of that day pressing down on me even now, as if the air itself knew what was coming. I'd been out, my mind a tangled mess of guilt and distraction, and when I finally walked through the front door, the house felt different, too still, too heavy. My footsteps echoed as I made my way into the living room, and there he was, David. Sitting on the edge of the couch, his shoulders hunched, His hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. The air was thick with a tension I could almost taste, bitter and suffocating. Then I saw his eyes, red-rimmed, raw, filled with a pain so deep it cut right through me. I'd never seen him like this, not in all our years together, not even during our worst fights. This was something else, something broken beyond repair. He didn't yell, he didn't raise his voice. And somehow, that silence was worse than any shouting match we'd ever had. It sliced into me, sharper than any words could have been, leaving me exposed and defenseless. Then he lifted his hand, and I saw it. My phone, gripped so tightly, I thought the screen might crack. My heart plummeted, a sickening lurch in my chest, as he turned the screen toward me. There it was, a message from Nathan I'd forgotten to delete, the words glaring like a neon sign in the dim room. Evidence I couldn't deny. His voice, when he finally spoke, was hollow, like it came from somewhere far away. "Is it true, Rach?" That's all he said. 4 words, but they carried the weight of our entire marriage, the trust we'd built over nearly 2 decades crumbling in an instant. I couldn't lie. Not anymore. Not with him looking at me like that, his gaze stripping away every excuse I'd ever rehearsed in my head. My knees buckled, and I sank onto the floor, the cold hardwood biting into my skin as the tears came. I broke down completely, the dam I'd built around my secrets bursting open. I confessed everything, not just about Nathan, but Eric and Daniel too. Every hidden moment, every stolen touch, every time I'd let myself fall into someone else's arms because I felt so unseen, so invisible in my own home. I told him how I'd been drowning in loneliness for years, how I'd craved affection so desperately that I'd sought it in places I never should have. I sobbed through it all, my voice cracking as I tried to explain that I never meant to hurt him, that I'd been lost in my own pain and made choices I couldn't take back. But with every word, I could see the betrayal carving deeper lines into his face, his expression hardening into something I didn't recognize. Each confession felt like a dagger, twisting in both of us, and I hated myself for every syllable that left my lips. He didn't say a word, not a single one. He just stood up, slow and deliberate, like moving took every ounce of strength he had left. Then he walked out of the room, his footsteps fading down the hallway, leaving me there, crumpled on the floor, surrounded by the wreckage of everything I'd destroyed. I don't know how long I stayed there, my tears soaking into the wood, my chest heaving with sobs that wouldn't stop. It felt like hours, like the world had stopped turning and left me in that moment of utter devastation. I'd always known this could happen, had feared it in the back of my mind, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality of seeing him walk away, knowing I'd shattered the man I'd promised to love forever. I thought that was the worst of it. I thought the pain couldn't cut any deeper, but I was wrong. A few days later, I got a call that tore what was left of my heart to pieces. It was Emily, my sister, her voice trembling on the other end of the line. I didn't even know she'd been home during that awful confrontation, that she'd made a surprise visit and overheard part of my confession from her old room upstairs. She had heard enough to piece it all together, and the disappointment in her tone was a fresh wound, slicing through me as she spoke. "How could you do this, Rach?" she asked, her voice breaking. "To David? To your family? To yourself?" I had no answer, no defense, just the hollow ache of knowing I'd let down the one person who'd always believed in me. She didn't yell, just like David hadn't, but her quiet hurt was a weight I couldn't shake. That call ended with a long silence, and I knew things between us would never be the same. Now, months have passed since that devastating night, but the aftermath of my choices clings to me like a shadow I can't outrun. The process of separating from David was a slow, agonizing unraveling of the life we'd woven together over nearly 2 decades. We sat across from each other at a sterile conference table, lawyers on either side, dividing up assets like we were splitting a ledger instead of a shared history. The house we'd filled with memories went to him. I couldn't bear to stay in a place that echoed with the laughter we'd lost. I moved into a small apartment on the edge of Portland, a cramped one-bedroom with peeling paint on the walls and a view of a dingy alley. The first night there, I stood in the middle of the empty space, surrounded by unpacked boxes, and felt the silence press in on me, heavier than ever. This wasn't a home. It was a shell. A stark reminder of everything I'd thrown away. When David and I have to interact, usually about Emily, it's like speaking to a stranger through a pane of glass. Our conversations are clipped, formal, stripped of any warmth. "She'll be at my place this weekend," he'll say, his voice flat, his hazel eyes avoiding mine. I nod, swallowing the lump in my throat, knowing there's no room for the apologies that sit heavy on my tongue. Each exchange is a fresh cut, a reminder of the intimacy we've lost, replaced by this cold, transactional distance. I miss the way he used to look at me, even in our quieter years, with a softness that made me feel seen. Now there's nothing but a wall between us, one I built brick by brick with every secret I kept. Emily, my sweet sister, struggles to bridge the gap my betrayal created. When she visits, it's out of obligation, not the eager connection we once shared. Her hugs, once so warm and full of life, are now stiff, mechanical, like she's holding herself back from me. I can see the conflict in her eyes, the way she wrestles with wanting to forgive but can't quite get there. "I'm trying, Rach," she admitted once, her voice small, her gaze fixed on the floor. "But it's hard to look at you the same way." Those words pierced me deeper than I can say. A constant echo in my mind as I watch her keep her distance, a chasm I don't know how to cross. I long for the days when we'd collapse into laughter over nothing, when she'd confide in me without hesitation. Now every forced smile from her is a mirror reflecting my own failures. In the wake of all this loss, I knew I had to cut ties with Nathan, Eric, and Daniel. The thrill they offered, the rush of feeling alive in their arms, turned to ash the moment I saw the pain in David's face. I ended things with each of them, one by one, over curt phone calls that left no room for lingering. Their voices, once a siren call to my restless heart, now sounded hollow, a fleeting distraction that cost me everything. I remember one lonely night, sitting cross-legged on my sagging couch, the glow of my phone the only light in the dim apartment. I scrolled through old messages, my thumb hovering over Nathan's name, then Eric's, then Daniel's. The memories of stolen moments, of heated embraces and whispered promises under the cover of darkness, flooded back, tempting me to reach out, to chase that fleeting high one more time. My heart raced with the thought of feeling something, anything to fill the... Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment if you enjoyed this story. This will help us create more engaging stories for you.